go over the materials that I use to study for this exam. And I wanted to start with the reference handbook first because I think it's the most important study resource that you have. So a PDF of this handbook will be provided to you when you register for the exam. And what it is it is just a giant reference book that you'll have this exact thing when you're taking the exam itself. Now, it's not going to be, it'll be basically be a PDF form, but it won't be opening with Adobe, for instance. It'll be opening within the testing software. But since it's considered sort of an open book exam, you're provided with this reference handbook, and this thing is really great. It's got pretty much everything you need in it, and a lot of the questions you'll find are actually sort of just plug and chug. There were a couple questions on here that I had never even dealt with. There were things in machine design, for instance, that we hadn't gone over. I think something with planetary gears or something. And it was literally just take the formula, plug in the knowns, and solve for the unknown. I mean, it was not bad. So this thing is really great, and you need to make sure that as you're studying for this exam, that you're using this handbook and really getting to know where everything is in the handbook. So for instance, you don't want to be looking all over this thing to find where to get to dynamics, when you're taking your dynamics. So you need to know where everything is in this thing, and obviously it's got the table of contents here. I don't remember if this was here for the actual exam. I think it was. But another feature that's really nice is that you can search. So if I wanted to look up conduction, for instance, I would just do a Control F, and it would take me right to the page with conduction. And if maybe I need to do sort of a, review, or if I need to look up a formula or whatever, it's all right there. You'll need to practice using this handbook because you'll need to see how they, maybe they used variables that you weren't familiar with in college or whatever. So you'll need to make sure that when you look at this stuff in here that it makes sense to you during the test. And I mean, you're going to be going back and forth between using this and the exam itself. But this handbook's really great. This is definitely the #1 resource, and I wouldn't recommend, I personally didn't buy the printed version of it because I knew that when I was taking the exam that I was going to be using a digital copy. So I only practiced using the digital copy because obviously you want to simulate test day conditions as much as you can. So you don't want to give yourself any resources that you're not going to have during the test. And you want to make sure that the one resource that you do have, that you know how to use it very, very well. So I think I mentioned that I didn't really study, I didn't really study that much for this exam, just a couple of weeks. But while I studied, I had this thing up every single time to make sure that I really knew it inside and out. So moving on, the other materials that I used, I'll kind of go over these one by one. So I had this Barrons book, and overall, I pretty much stopped using it once I realized that, I hit this one question where it was asking me to use this, I know what it was for. It was for the stress concentrations. So it was asking me for some stress or something, and I had to go look up the stress concentrations. Well, when I was comparing it to the PDF, you don't have that table in here. So they were asking me to use something that I knew wasn't going to be provided during the test and that therefore would likely not be asked during the test. So once I hit that point, I noticed that a couple times in this book, I didn't really consider it a valuable resource after that. One thing I will say is that it's got a couple practice tests. Fine, I don't even think I use those. But one thing that this book does have that I really liked was it has a little breakdown after every section. So for instance, you'll look at dynamics, and if there's something that you don't understand in the dynamics section, you can scroll to the end, and first of all, it's got some practice problems. Maybe you can figure it out that way. Or if not, it has a conceptual breakdown of each concept. So for instance, if you're talking about DC circuits, it'll go over how to add resistors in series, how to add resistors in parallel. So I like that it had that sort of breakdown for if you need a review. I would say the practice problems were not quite as valuable in this book, however. The next resource I used was this FE Mechanical Practice Problems, and this is the one that I used just for straight bulk practice. I thought this one was pretty good overall. I didn't end up hitting every single problem in here, but overall I thought it was good, and the problems were actually I think substantially harder than the exam itself. So if you can do these problems well, I think you're in pretty good shape. And then I think the most valuable practice problem book that I used was this one. And there's some serious problems with this book. So you can see that it was written in 2009. I think the edition I had was from like 2012 or something like that. And there have been pretty considerable changes to the FE exam since then. So a lot of it is outdated, but I think this was the most up-to-date version of this book that there is. So this is just what I ended up using. And the reason that this one is so good is because it's actually put out by NCEES, which is the company that puts out the FE exam itself. So the questions in this book, although they were somewhat easier than the FE Mechanical practice book, they were, I think, more representative of what was actually on the test in the end. So once I got, conceptual review from the Barrons and really hit some heavy practice problems in the FE Mechanical, then I went to the sample questions just to see if I was doing well on them, and for the most part I was. And so I felt that was a good sign. You'll notice this book only has 60 questions. It's more of a booklet than a book. I mean, it's really short. I did end up going through all the questions in this book, and I think this was probably one of the best resources that I had. I think that's it for what I used to review for this exam. I do see now that there's an FE Mechanical Practice exam that is also put out by NCEES. I don't know. I mean, it says it was out in March 2017, so apparently it was out when I took the exam. I don't know why I didn't buy this thing. Looks like it's probably a pretty good resource. Ratings don't look that great, but you may try this too. I think going straight to the source and using materials that are put out by the same body that actually make the test, NCEES, that's always a good idea. Instead of having a third party's materials, you're going straight to the source. So this may be a valuable resource too. Anyways, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback and love to answer some questions for you.